Indeed, we are crying power. Good evening, everyone. I am Joshua D. Detman. I use he, him pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as the co executive director for the Labor Network for Sustainability with Liz Ratzloff. I'm calling from occupied Choctaw and Chickasaw land, also known as Jackson, Mississippi. And we share greetings to all of you in this moment as we first want to amplify the voices of resilience across our movement as we move in grief, as we try to process moments of uncertainty post election, but as we continue to be resilient and move with urgency and fierceness in this political climate and political moment, and we draw from the below. And we're grateful to share in this moment a Green New Deal from below, knowing that the policies and the provisions set in the Green New Deal are extremely important for this moment and for people and the planet and for the idea that folks should have good jobs, green jobs that are not greenwashed, that are not with not the effort of folks pulling the wool over their eyes, and knowing that we have and are making provisions for a safe planet and for a healthy and living planet where folks have good jobs on that living planet. We're again very and extremely grateful to be joined by a host of panelists and to be joined with Jeremy Brecher himself, whose book Green New Deal from Below: How Ordinary People Are Building a Just and Climate Safe Economy is again amplifying the voice of resilience and documenting movements across the nation that are building power from below and building power for a living planet with good jobs. We're asked that those of you who are joining us share your welcomes and your intros in the chat. And if you have any questions, please share those in the chat. We'll be fielding those from the chat for later. With no further ado, I would love to pass to Jeremy Brecher, author of Green New Deal from Below: How Ordinary People Are Building a Just and Climate Safe Economy.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Joshua. And thanks to everyone who's here looking through the pictures of who's here. I see there are lots of old friends of mine, and it feels great to be able to share this launch of my new book, The Green New Deal from Below, with so many old friends and with so many other folks who are here who are interested or curious and have decided to join this launch. I'm Jeremy Brecher. I helped found the Labor Network for Sustainability a dozen years ago. I'm a writer and a labor historian. And at Labor Network for Sustainability, what we're about is building a labor climate movement. So often, unions and the labor movement are portrayed as being somehow the opponents of environmental protection and climate protection. And but the fact is that we're all people who have to make a living, and we're also all people who have to live in the environment and live in the climate and have our kids and our grandkids live in the climate that we're going to face. And so we all have a tremendous common interest around both climate protection and protecting workers. A few years ago, as many of you will remember, the idea of a Green New Deal hit enormous headlines, kicked off by a sit-in by the Sunrise Youth Movement and legislation that was developed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. It was a national sensation, huge political support, a great majority of population in polls said they supported the Green New Deal. And then it was fought in Congress and fought to a standstill by the fossil fuel interests and by the large corporate interests and employers who wanted nothing to do with something like the Green New Deal. But I started noticing that there were developments around the country at a local level, community level, municipal level, county level, state level, in tribes, in unions, where people on the ground were developing their own versions of the Green New Deal. Sometimes they called that the Green New Deal. Sometimes they didn't use the term, but they incorporated the basic principle of the Green New Deal, which is to fight climate change and build a climate-safe economy and society in a way that creates good jobs, hopefully union jobs, and that challenges the forms of injustice that permeate our society and move us towards a more just society. Well, I began writing little bits about this, and eventually I ended up discovering I had to put it into a book. And that's where the Green New Deal from Below, How Ordinary People Are Building a Just and Climate-Safe Economy, evolved. In the book, which has just come out within the last week or so, there are more than 100 examples from more than 40 states of Green New Deal from Below programs, projects, and it was truly inspiring to me to discover them and to be able to write them up and be able to share them. And the book was came out just after the elections, and when the elections results came in, I was worried that the book might have become irrelevant and that people would say, oh, Green New Deal from Below, that's just a footnote in history. It has nothing to do with happening today, let alone what's happening tomorrow. But I discovered when I went on some of the many webinars and organizational calls that I'm sure many of you have been on since the elections, that people were saying overwhelmingly that what we have to do now is go to the grassroots, go to the base, build bastions of resistance, and build community support for alternatives. And I heard this over and over and over again. And when I said to people I was a little worried about whether my book would still be relevant, people began saying, oh, it's so much more relevant now. This is exactly what we need to know in order to build the base that we need for the Trump era. So let me try to summarize very briefly, and then we'll move on why I think the Green New Deal from Below is very, very relevant now in the new era that we're entering. First of all, it is a critical way to build bastions of resistance. And that's going to involve many other kinds of things. It's going to involve protecting people in the streets, legal challenges, and so many other forms of direct action that I wouldn't try to summarize them here, although I am trying to write about them. Secondly, the Green New Deal from Below has been extremely effective in unifying coalitions of different groups. And that's going to be absolutely crucial. The Trump regime are going to do everything they can to play us off against each other, and learning how and being able to cooperate in the kinds of coalitions that have made the Green New Deals from Below is going to be critical for this period. Third, it's really important that we have positive and inspiring models of what we're trying to do. People are going to resist, but they're also going to get very tired and say, well, we're just resisting and resisting and resisting. What does it mean in terms of getting to someplace that's where we want to be? And I think the Green New Deal from below creates positive and inspiring models, and we can create them, and they're things that can actually be built in real life in cities and states and neighborhoods and in tribes and in all kinds of communities and in unions. And that's going to be an important part of what we can do in this difficult period we're going into. It shows that those actions can really improve people's lives. If we shut down a power plant that burns coal and creates asthma in a poor community of color, and we replace it with renewable energy, not only do we help the climate, but also we help the health of the people in that community in a very concrete way. And that's part of what the Green New Deal from below has proven able to do. And finally, I think all of this together creates building blocks for a national and even a global Green New Deal. And that gives us a sense of where we're going and what we're trying to do and what we need to make these efforts contribute to. So this is not a normal book launch with the author droning on. In fact, I'm ready to stop right now. We decided that this book launch really should feature the kinds of people who are creating these Green New Deals from below, whether they use that term or not. And so the main part of tonight's program is going to be for us to hear from people who are creating these kinds of initiatives at grassroots levels. I'll be glad to answer questions and look forward to it, but I'm looking forward even more to hearing and learning from the on the ground frontline folks that we're going to hear from tonight.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with all of you tonight. I'm Virginia Rodino, the Director of Communications here at Labor Network for Sustainability. I'm on the unceded territory of the Piscataway Nation in Baltimore, Maryland. Especially in these times, it's crucial that we're standing together and resisting what the 1% are attempting to oppose on us, as Jeremy just told us. The Green New Deal from below is an important communications framework to understand our work. It's a critical organizing approach to mobilize our family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers to create the movement we and our planet need. It's my honor tonight to be able to introduce our panelists who are bringing to life what Jeremy's book shares. One of our first speakers, Priyanka Mohanty, is the Executive Director of the United Auto Workers, the Center for Manufacturing a Green Economy, where she's building the organization that will lead the union's recruitment and training for careers in climate manufacturing, empowering a well-trained green workforce to meet the growing needs of manufacturing operations created by the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS Act. Priyanka comes from 9 years in climate policy and activism. She earned her Master of Science with UC Berkeley's Energy and Resources Group. She grew up in Phoenix, but currently lives in Oakland. Aiden Alim. Aiden is a 23-year-old organizer from Kansas City, Missouri. She's been organizing with her local Sunrise Movement chapter in Kansas City since 2019 and is currently involved in the chapter's campaign for better buses in Kansas City. Aiden also organizes with workers and organizing with the Missouri Workers Center. David Sotelo Escobedo, Davida Sotelo Escobedo, pardon me, grew up in the San Joaquin Valley and came to the labor movement in 2017 as a union steward with AFT Local 3544, Graduate Teaching Fellows Federation. They have since worked at the Unite Here International Union and San Francisco Jobs with Justice, always learning from the stories and wisdom of worker leaders. Davida believes in the transformative power of narratives that are rooted in place and in right relationship with the land. They live in West Sonoma County with their beloved, and you can often find them meandering through oak woodlands or watching the stars. Davida is now doing direct organizing, communications, and strategic research with Indigenous and migrant farm workers and North Bay Jobs with Justice. And finally, Ben Sudaby, the former president of ASME 1624, and current delegate to the Austin Central Labor Council. So I'd like to remind all of us to put our intros in the chat and to ask any questions that might come up in either the chat or in the Q&A function. A big hand and a big thanks to all of you for joining Jeremy tonight during the launch of this important work. First, we're going to go around and hear from each speaker about the green project or program that they're helping to build from below. Let's start with Priyanka at the UAW CMGE. So Priyanka, I'd like for you to share with us what your program is all about, why and how it started and its goals, and then also to get into other local or state groups, organizations, community spaces that are working together on your program, why it's important for the program to have these local allies and partners.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel, Jeremy. I'm really excited to read your book. And I think it's really important now more than ever that we continue to have these types of discussions. So really grateful and expressing gratitude for being able to be a part of these conversations. So as Virginia mentioned, our program is called the UAW Center for Manufacturing a Green Economy, or CMGE. We are the nonprofit workforce development arm of the UAW Region 6 out here in the West Coast. And the Region 6 represents the 9 Western states out here in the West. And our inception of our program was really interesting. You know, some things are now shifting as a result of our changing political climate, but, you know, I really point to 4 big sort of incepting factors that created this organization. The first, which Virginia already mentioned, is the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. And although we don't really know what the future of those pieces of legislation hold in a Trump administration, I will say that the passage of that really spurred a movement of labor, community, tribal nations, people all over the country to begin to get involved that would otherwise not be involved in climate industrial policy. And those pieces of legislation set the groundwork for labor and community partnerships that really are the basis for what we do. The second thing that I'll point to is the election of the UAW international president, President Shawn Fain, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with at this point. Shawn Fain was an incredible boost to the labor movement, and in particular, you know, he took a very clear stance that climate and labor are not at odds with each other. But in order for us to do this transition right, we must center workers, and particularly workers that are going to be most impacted by the climate transition. The third thing that I'll point to is really putting that into practice. So as all of you know, the UAW had a big strike last year, a very successful strike. And part of the success of that strike was the bringing of thousands of EV and battery jobs under union contracts. So it showed what was really possible. It showed that a green job and a good job can actually exist together. Whereas otherwise, what we had heard for many decades was, oh, a green job can't be good, a good job can't be green. And that really also set the stage for what we do. So moving over westward, the UAW Region 6 signed a neutrality agreement with a battery manufacturer out here called Sparks. And that's really where CMGE was born. CMGE was started by the region to develop recruitment and what we call high road or worker-centered training programs that would connect communities, local communities, into good union jobs in battery manufacturing. And so that's really our goal, and that's really what drives us. I would say 2 driving factors for what we're trying to do here is the understanding that people need good jobs to thrive. And we feel that it's very important that these new industries that are getting public investment, billions of dollars in public investment, are creating public good. And a union job is not only a pathway to shared prosperity, to good wages, a middle-class lifestyle, but on top of that, a union job in these industries builds the political and economic consensus that we need to decarbonize at the pace and scale that we know we need to. And so that's really what drives our work. And that's really what you know, what I keep coming back to, regardless of our political circumstances, that this transition is happening. We have the technology, we have those tools in our toolbox, but what we have to do right now and what our work is building that political and economic solidarity. And I think the easiest way to do that is through jobs. I'm sorry, Virginia, am I going, should I pause there? Or am I good to finish my question?
Good.
Mhm.
So I think just to really quickly to your 2 points, what are other local and state groups? How are we working together in this program? That's really what roots the work that we do. So we see our work as 4 parts. The first part is recruitment, right? And so we want to make sure that where communities are having manufacturing facilities get set up, those communities are the ones that are getting access to these good jobs. And so we build very intentional community partnerships wherever we go. The second thing that we're doing is building a pre-employment program where we actually orient people who are interested in this work into what is climate change? Why are you doing this? What are batteries? How do they work? What's their importance to decarbonization? What is health and safety? You know, health and safety is a huge piece of this because there are no standards right now around manufacturing for health and safety. And so we really want to make sure that folks feel prepared, empowered, and ready to do this work. We provide wraparound services. We work with our community groups there as well, making sure that it's tailored to community needs. And finally, what we hope to do is build an apprenticeship program because we think that apprenticeship programs are the best in class way to actually do this type of training, to build a skilled workforce, to give people career opportunities, to actually show what's possible in the industry. And, you know, it's really important to have local allies and partners because we could not do this work without our local allies and partners. I'll tell you a quick story, which is that one of our main partners in Sacramento, for example, is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or known as SMUD. Those who are familiar with SMUD know that it's a municipal utility. It's deeply embedded in the community because it's the local power provider. It's not a shareholder company. It is actually deeply connected to all of these various community groups and to the city itself. And so SMUD has been such an important partner for us to think through, how do we reach people? How do we present this opportunity? How do we build something that will last and actually, you know, create the impetus for further decarbonization in the area? So I'll stop there, but we're really excited about our work. We're excited to expand it, and we see the opportunities to do so across the state and across the region.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. Highlighting how green jobs can be good, how workers can fight and win those good and green jobs is supported by community and allies within the movement. So thank you so much for your work and the work of UAW. Next, let's hear from Aiden from the Sunrise Movement, Kansas City. Aiden, if you can tell us about your project, why and how it started, what its goals are, and what other groups are working together on this program, why it's important for this program to have those local allies and partners beside you.
Yeah, so I gave it a little bit away in my bio, but the project that Sunrise Movement Kansas City is working on is Better Buses for KC. So Sunrise, like National, is an organization that works for basically like the whole entire country. But Sunrise also has individual chapters within each city in order to address the needs that those cities are going through. And one thing that, you know, Sunrise Kansas City, our chapter, realizes a major need of the city is public transit. Not only public transit, but like reliable public transit. So right now, you know, in Kansas City, you could be at a bus stop waiting almost an hour to get to the bus. And once you get to that bus, you know, it'll take 45 minutes to get to where you actually need to go. Then you need to get on another bus to connect your route and then actually get to where you need to go to work or to the doctors or to the grocery store. And, you know, when we look at major cities that have developed their public transit, we see that there's an improvement with that public transit. And we want that in Kansas City. So we realized that, you know, our public transit system was failing in many ways. It wasn't reaching all parts of the city. It wasn't reaching all people in the city. And we needed better buses. So last year, September, we officially launched our campaign of Better Buses for KC. We had a list of demands, including that all bus shelters be weatherproof, having like actual shelters over it, so you don't have to be standing out in the rain. Because of course, it's rain's intense in KC, it's intense heat in KC, it's really intense everything. It's just a really weird mix in Kansas City for some reason. And a lot of people are just outside in the horrible weather waiting for the bus for almost an hour. Another demand is that we wanted bus routes to be no less than 15 minutes apart. So that way you don't have to wait almost an hour waiting for the next bus if you miss it. We also wanted all bus stops to be no more than a 10-minute walk from each Kansas City address. We want to make sure that the buses were green, first of all, and that buses were electrified and powered and wouldn't continue to add to the climate crisis, instead take away from it. We also wanted to make sure that it was good union jobs that were funding our public transit system. And another one we wanted to make sure, right now in Kansas City, we have a zero fare for our bus system. So the buses, thankfully, are free for everyone in the city. And one thing we wanted to make sure is that that never went away. We want zero fare forever, so that, I mean, the poor shouldn't have to pay for the system. It should be the taxes of the rich. But I mean, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, that's essentially what our demands were. And the allies that we worked with were our local ATU chapter, the bus union in Kansas City, and also an organization called Missouri Worker Center, which I also happen to work with too. And they work with low-wage workers all across the city, organizing them for better pay, paid sick days, benefits, things like that. And the reason why we worked with those partners is because, one, we know that our bus system is deeply underfunded in KC, and it impacts bus drivers as much as it impacts bus riders. We know that union jobs are under threat of being cut or not being able to get the benefits and pay that they truly deserve. So we know that was an issue. So we knew we had to talk to bus drivers, because bus drivers need to be included in the conversation. We need to make sure that more good paying union jobs are available for everybody in Kansas City. And then we also knew we needed to talk to Missouri Worker Center, Stand Up KC, which is also a part of Missouri Worker Center. We need to talk to them because it's working class people, it's poor and working class people who are taking the bus every day to work, to the doctor's office, to school, to the grocery store. And these are the people who are often ignored. You know, there's almost a myth in Kansas City that nobody uses the bus, which is just, I'll tell you right now, it's a blatant lie. A lot of people use the bus. It's just not people who are actively engaged with in our society in Kansas City. It's people who the city council members and the city manager aren't going to see in their day-to-day, because it's poor and working class people. You know, so that's why we wanted to make sure that we actually had workers and working class folks who are involved in this campaign, because they're the ones who are relying on the bus system. So they should have a voice in how our bus system is actually running. And we think it's important because, you know, people who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. And we want to make sure that people who are actually riding the bus have a voice in it. And people who are actually driving the bus also have a voice. So that's why we thought it was really important to talk to those two organizations and also talk to bus riders. You know, we went out to bus stops all across the city and canvassed to bus riders, be like, hey, what do you want to see change in our bus system? We talked to like thousands of bus riders. We actually made a petition of those demands after talking to those riders. And we had over 1,000 signatures from Kansas Cityans fighting for that. And right now, in Kansas City right now, one issue is that, like I said, our bus system is severely underfunded. And right now we're having a threat of a $30 million budget cut. And, you know, we're pretty afraid of that. We're afraid of our bus routes being cut and people not being able to get to the doctor's office or the grocery store or wherever it is they're going. We're also deeply scared of union jobs being cut and being replaced by microtransit in the city, which is being funded by a company called Z-Trip, which is completely exploiting their workers. And we know that it's undermining good paying union jobs, and it's also undermining the public transit in the city. So that's one thing that we're fighting for right now. We're trying to get over that hurdle of budget funding and trying to fight for all the different avenues that we can fund buses, and then not only maintain our bus system, but, you know, fight for better. So that's a little bit about what we got going on in Kansas City.
Thanks so much, Aiden, for helping to put a spotlight on essential services and the workers who provide these services and who are fighting to make these jobs good jobs and sustainable ones. So important. Thanks so much. Friends, don't forget to put your questions that you may have for any of our speakers in the chat or the Q&A function. Next, let's hear from Davida at Jobs with Justice North Bay. Davida, if you would, please tell us about your campaign, how it started and what its goals are, and describe your allies who are supporting the campaign and why their support is important.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me here. And yeah, just to start off this question, I want to just take us back to 2020, which was one of many recent intense years for fires on the West Coast. There was like serious fires burning here in Sonoma County, in the north of the Bay Area, on the north side of the Bay Area. And in that kind of grape harvest happens like right in the middle of fire season. It always does. And there was a lot of like anecdotal stories coming out, from that year about like farm workers working and being sent back into evacuation zones. And I think I think part of going into like the new year, kind of like a shift in focus for North Bay Jobs with Justice was trying to, go out and like hear from workers' experiences, really believe in like listening to workers and understanding what their needs are, especially in the front line of the climate crisis. And yeah, a lot of like amazing leaders came out of that process of just like workers to workers, like doing surveys with other workers, and basically coming up with like a list of demands, like a list of worker demands for on the front lines of climate crisis, right? And basically, so part of kind of like what we've been doing since then is like we've been kind of like having this, what we call this little dance between like fighting the bad in the wine industry, while also like building the good. And I'll get into like both those. Like on the one hand, Sonoma County, Napa County is a lot of people think of as wine country, right? We have this like multi-billion-dollar industry as a luxury crop, that just thinking about some of the actors here, like literally, billionaire wine owners that like put, glyphosate-based chemicals on the land, extract a lot from the land, extract a lot for workers from workers. And so as I think starting there and starting like building a base with farm workers to fight for better wages in that industry, people aren't making enough on top of the fact that they're now confronting yearly crisis when it's not fires and smoke, it's floodings. We have a bomb cyclone going on right now, but like, during the pruning, folks missing out on days of work. When it's not that, it's like extreme heat, folks losing on for hours. And just trying to fight for more from the industry. And out of that fight, just for example, back in July in Healdsburg, which is kind of like one of the little epicenters of tourism here in Sonoma County, we had like 600 farm workers, which might not sound super big from folks coming from bigger cities, but Healdsburg had never seen a march like that where 600 workers and community allies marched through downtown Healdsburg and shut down a historic bridge, demanding dignified wages and like disaster pay so that folks can be compensated justly in dangerous conditions, and making sure that they also can get paid for the work they lose when there is disasters. And so out of that fight, we've been able to develop like really strong leaders, like really strong worker leaders, and then a core group of like worker organizers, right? Like 8 farm worker leaders who are getting trained in organizing to train other leaders to be able to get to a point where we're able to like turn out to get to a point where we're doing a 600-person march. And lots of folks who work in the vineyards, a lot of folks who work throughout the fields in California come from generations of tending to land. Back in a lot of our base comes from, a lot of folks coming from Oaxaca or Central America, and come from generations of like tending to the land, and have a much radical different perspective of how to be in right relation to the land in relation to the growers that they're working for. And again, like these industries that like to greenwash themselves as like caring for the land and being good stewards of the land, but in the reality they're not. They're using tons of water and putting dangerous chemicals. So I think part of what evolved out of the fight was kind of like recognizing the leadership, the experience, and the wisdom so many of farm workers have in like treating land in a different way. And we've been able to, over the past 3 years, build a lot with local allies, other organizations like Gresham River Keeper, Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, just to name kind of like some of our early allies. But now we have an extensive list, and all credit to Mariana and Connor, kind of like our just transition coordinators, to be like building out this like really robust program to be able to like start doing workforce programs, worker led, trying to center worker leadership, where it's all about doing vegetation fuel reduction in our wooded areas. Sonoma County is a mostly rural county. I have some links I put in the. I'm on my phone, so I'm having a hard time transferring over, but some links to some videos of the march, but also some of the work of some prescribed burns some of our workers are speaking to and sharing kind of like their experience from, doing this when they were kids with their parents and now doing prescribed burns here in Sonoma County, or removing this like massive 20-foot tall invasive reed called arundo and like removing that from the waterways. And so it's like all this amazing like regenerative work of like tending to land, and folks coming out of what is an extractive industry and reclaiming their power to fight the bad bosses, but also reclaiming the power of their labor to tend to the land in a more holistic way.
Thank you very, very much, Davida. It's extremely important for us to hear how the workers who are on the front lines and bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, how they are helping to lead the resistance on the land, in the fields, to help empower all of us and to really show us that we can win. So finally, let's hear from Ben at ASME Local 1624. Ben, if you can tell us about your campaign, how it started and what its goals are, and describing who your supporters are and why their support is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody. I'm Ben Sotheby, he, him, el. I'm calling from Tonkawa and Lipan Apache land, also known as Austin, Texas. AFSCME 1624 is a local that represents the city of Austin workers and Travis County workers. I work at the county. And our fights, have been going on for a long time. Just to give a little background, I think, our personal experience here is a lot shaped by the terrain that we're organizing under. In Texas, it's illegal for us to have a contract as public workers. So we're not bargaining for the next contract. That's against the law. And what we're organizing around sometimes are many times viewed as community issues, but because we're public employees and also live here, those fights are very hand in hand. So it's actually really good. It puts us in a place where we have natural allies. So the thing that I think also really gives me a lot of hope on being this call is something that was in the intro of Jeremy's book, talking about the Lilliputian strategy of if we're all doing our part wherever we may be, the sum of those efforts can be really large and can take down giants and stuff, right? Good Gulliver's Travel reference. Our green organizing work has taken many different forms. It's many different fights that have all these tie-ins. And because the climate is something that affects all things and everyone, there's always going to be some tie-in, which makes it such a powerful lens to organize workers with. And it also helps us bring people into the fight regardless of what your day job is, right? Like whether you're a spreadsheets budgets guy like me, or you're out in the field, mowing or taking care of our parks or beautiful springs, regardless of what your job is, there's going to be a component that's going to impact you. And some of those fights have really highlighted that. Our city passed laws for heat protections. In Texas, it's not unknown for it to get over 110 degrees. And then our state level government said, no, you can't do that. And, that ties up in courts and stuff. And that looks like organizing on the local level to get good things at your city or county. It looks like as public employees saying, well, if the court said we can't do it to make every employer in our area do it, well, we'll hold ourselves to a higher standard and set a higher standard. And then if major employers all kind of follow that standard, you kind of set the example that it's not unreasonable to ask for people to have a water break when it's 100 degrees outside in the shade. 5 5 to 10 minutes can save somebody's life. We live in a state where construction deaths on construction sites, we're number one in Texas for death on construction sites, and a lot of those people who are impacted are amongst the most vulnerable populations, right? So that looks like pulling people in from many different labor unions into these fights together. So it looks like our rank and file members who are very driven on climate, saying we're not going to get any action on this unless we bring in other unions and make progress on that. And I think that's how you build the base for more buy-in into climate things. When people who might be hesitant when they hear, somebody's talking about green stuff, they hear, oh, you're going to come for my job. But when you say, no, I want to give you work, I want to have our municipally owned power company do some plans that are going to maybe be geothermal, and send some geothermal storage, and send some work to you plumbers and electricians. We want to upgrade the transmission lines that we already own and have better quality transmission, more capacity. That's work for y'all. It helps us move our green and produced energy around in more efficient ways, and waste less, and give more stability to our community. And then it can be run and administered by our members. And then they say, oh, this is actually good for us and our members. They're that much more likely to join in with the next fight. Obviously, we're going to be working together with groups like local groups like our Sunrise group for we'll find issues in common with the local Sierra Club. Whoever wants to fight and join in these things, you pull them in and you say, these are what our goals are, this is how we're going to attack it. Work your lists, talk to whatever elected officials who have decision-making power on this, and let them know this is something that the community cares about. Our green organizing really helps that broad-based struggle, because it highlights that the decisions and the action comes from us, the workers, us, the community, bottom up. And I think it's really powerful as we face, this incoming administration. It is actually, something that I hate to say it, but now everybody's going to be looking more like Texas. Your conditions are going to be more like us. There's not going to be, as much hope pinned on the federal government coming in to save us. It's on us to do it. And the beauty of that work is there's so much of it to do. There's a lane for everybody. The boat's really big. Get aboard. You can get in many different avenues in this, and you can build really great connections and build community, which is another way that we are going to survive those types of difficult conditions, is by building community and getting to know each other, and fight against these efforts to throw money towards old technologies that are based on burning things versus investing in technologies and resources that benefit us. You think about storage, you think about all kinds of ways of making electricity, something that's required for modern life, green and available, and actually cheaper and more stable for our communities. And that's actually one of the current fights that we've got. Thanks to the folks who came before, Austin actually owns its own municipal electric company, right? So that means that the board of directors is the city council, and that's one way that you can get a tie-in from people who are maybe like more geared towards electoral campaigns. Well, we've got a former member who is in a runoff to be on city council and is a real champion for our climate goals. One of which is our city co-owns a coal burning plant with the Lower Colorado River Authority that we're trying to get out of, but in a way that we're not going to abandon the workers who provided electricity for our city for such a long time, and whose community, which is separated by miles and miles of wires, they've borne the brunt of the pollution on their pecan orchards and their crop fields. So we're not going to abandon them, but we can find ways to maybe use that same transmission line and have green generation there, wind, solar. There's even places that have swapped out the carbon burning, the coal burning part of a plant and put sand storage for heat generated by something else into that same machinery, so they can still make the steam and all the jobs stay basically the same. There are many things to look at, and that's why it takes so many people. There's so many ideas, and this is also good for public budgets. I'm a nerdy guy. I got to bring it back to the public money. Um, these technologies and these efforts actually save us money. But it's a big fight, and it means going to a lot of meetings and getting into the weeds to getting them to calculate it correctly, right? For the old fossil fuel based stuff, they don't calculate the costs. They don't factor in those costs. They're not factoring in, how it affects the air we breathe and all the things. And they're also, we got to say that projections just 10 years ago of what green, solar, wind, what it would cost were wildly high. Like we miscalculated. It got cheap real fast in Texas, which has tons of wind power and solar. And now we've got the struggle of moving it around and storing it in ways that help. But the fact that public sector workers care about it, like ours, really helps the idea that this is something that we have democratic control over, right? You can vote for people who will do good things. You yourself can participate in that, and when they make decisions, that it has to be for the benefit of us, not some unknown shareholders. And it builds an appetite for more. It's like the snowball that gets rolling, right? You install a little bit of storage and hey, it works great. It's actually helping stabilize our grid and it's saving us money. It's actually, doing really good benefits, not just to the electricity of our community, but to the budget of our community. That builds an appetite for more and more. And it gives us an opportunity to tie in all the workers. Got to bring it back to the workers. You can have something that's concrete to take to somebody who works, like I said, maybe doing maintenance on a building. And they say, well, why should I care about, these folks who are teleworking and doing, these green things? I care about my pay and I care about my working conditions. And you say, well, one, we'll make sure that the conditions of your workplace are better. You'll have lots of work with all the retrofitting that we've got to do to our buildings. That is a long career. The maintenance, that is something that can't be offshored. And this directly impacts you and your kids and your grandkids. And have those talks where you walk through somebody to connect it to their material conditions, their pay, and the city they hope to stay in and live in and be able to afford to live in, is a way you can get more people into the fight. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that I'm really proud of that ASME 1624 has been doing.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thank you for sharing your optimism and your victories. And I think if workers can win in Texas, we should be able to do it anywhere. So thanks to you. Thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your Green New Deal from Below campaigns and work. If any of you are interested in purchasing the book, we actually have a special discount code to use tonight that we'll put in the chat now. Keep your questions coming in the chat. Yes, this meeting is being recorded and we will be sharing this later. So make sure you sign up to keep in touch with us at Labor Network for Sustainability, and you'll get the link to this meeting and we can continue together this important conversation and all of our work as we move forward together. So I have a question for the whole panel. How do you see the Green New Deal from Below framework in relation to your work? Who would like to start? Priyanka, would you like to?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone described here aspects of the Green New Deal in some capacity. And so I think that the work really speaks for itself. I'll say for us, where we think we fit into this idea of the Green New Deal from below is really focusing in on this question of a just transition, right? How do we change the economic levers of our economy? How do we actually make this shift from a fossil fuel economy to a net zero economy? And what are the economic and social shifts that come with that transition? You know, we really believe that good jobs are critically important. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people bought into these industries. We're trying to have communities rally around the idea of a climate transition. We're trying to build, you know, that critical piece of the Green New Deal. If you all see, I have our logo up here, which was really inspired by the Green New Deal, right? It shows a revitalization of America. It shows a vision of what is possible. It shows sort of a creative solution that takes what we've done and turns it into something that we will do. I just feel like what we're trying to do is really harness that fundamental economic piece of how do we bring workers into the climate space? How do we make sure that those jobs are good jobs? And then how do we build power as a result? How do we actually change our economic systems? When you unionize, when you have worker power in these new industries, that also changes how we approach our climate issues. So I'll give you one example, one thing that we're thinking about. You know, there's a lot of questions and valid questions, I think, about how we're going to source the materials for these batteries that we're building, right? You know, I used to be a scientist before I came into this position, and I'll tell you that, you know, we started off with nickel, manganese, and cobalt. Cobalt is a very problematic mineral. It is, you know, it is mined on the backs of children in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But then we're now seeing this shift to lithium ferrophosphate batteries, right? That is opening up another conversation about lithium mining. How do we do lithium mining? How do we actually extract that resource? But here's the thing is that when you have unionized workers in a space, they can set the conditions for what is possible, how we mine, how we produce. Something that I think I'm really proud of, you know, there's many reasons that I'm proud to be part of the UAW world, but one thing that they've been doing recently that I find very interesting is contract negotiation and bargaining for the common good or the public good. And they've been implementing that as part of their contract negotiations out here in the West, particularly for their graduate student workers. And I think that idea speaks to something, right? Which is that when you have a powerful, organized union workforce, you can push for not only conditions of your own, right? Your wages, your healthcare, your benefits, but also the conditions of the work that you create. And this is not a new idea. Workers around the world have done this for decades. And I think as we think about the Green New Deal and we think about the Green New Deal from below, that's what's possible. That's what's shaping how we can move forward. Things like community benefits agreements. I'll say for you all, just one more example. We are working actively, you know, the UAW is working actively to build out a community benefits coalition, you know, down south in Imperial County. And that's, you know, working with community groups down there, thinking about there's another form of extraction for lithium. It's called direct lithium extraction, the Salton Sea, if you all have not familiarize yourself with the Salton Sea, I highly recommend you Google it. It is a very interesting story about an environmental disaster that has now turned into essentially a new gold rush because there's so much lithium that's been found at the basin of this Salton Sea. But the question is, how do those communities that have been left behind for decades actually benefit from that extraction? What does that impact look like on an environment that's already been impacted by things like industrial agriculture? How do we talk about democracy in the workplace, democracy in our communities? How do we build the infrastructure for these communities to thrive and survive? And so, you know, I say all of that to say that unions can play a really critical political role in organizing those types of coalitions that are the bread and butter of what a Green New Deal means. The last thing I'll say is just that, you know, I've been having a lot of conversations about the election and how we move forward. And, you know, I just saw somebody put in the chat that the barrier is big money and the oligarchy, and that's absolutely right. I think that that is like part of what we're trying to solve, right? Which is, how do we move forward? How do we meet people's needs? How do we create care and solidarity, and build that out as part of the work that we do? And so, you know, that's what we try to do here. That's what we try to do with our training. That's what we try to do with building that solidarity, within workers and within a community. And, you know, really, really interested and excited to, be surrounded by folks who are trying to do that same type of work in different ways. So
Thanks so much. Aiden?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I see the Green New Deal from below, like coming into our work, is one, really reshaping the view that people have of public transit work. I think like many people, they wouldn't immediately think like, oh, being a bus driver is a green job, when it is in reality. Like public transit is incredible for our environment. Public transit is incredible for not only our working class, but also just like our like the pollution issue that we have in Kansas City. So whenever we move into having a stronger public transit, it's encouraging people to take the bus, and it's encouraging people to, you know, no longer use their cars that's pumping up carbon into our atmosphere. So that is a green job. And we need to, Sunrise Movement in Kansas City specifically has like really been reframing the idea of like, what is a green job? A green job is also public service work. A green job is also farmers. A green job is jobs that are here now and jobs that we can like continue to create. But the fact is that the jobs that we have now that are green jobs are severely underfunded, and they're continuously like ignored. And yeah, they're essentially, yeah, they're ignored. And what we're doing in Kansas City is really trying to make sure that one, these jobs are supported and there continue to be union jobs. Because luckily we have union bus drivers in Kansas City in the ATU, but we need to continue to making sure that the union is strong, that the union is powerful in the city, and that the union can continue having more drivers in their rank and file. We don't need transportation companies coming in and either hiring non-union drivers and completely undercutting the union while also exploiting the workers themselves, while giving them lower pay, while giving them worse working conditions. So that's something that we really find important in like Sunrise, because it's both a climate issue and it is a working class issue. And like I think a lot of people have already touched on, like they're one and the same. In order, when we're talking about climate, we are talking about working class people. When we're talking about how the bus is going to lower pollution in Kansas City, we're also talking about how the bus is going to get working class people to and from their jobs. You know, if we don't have a bus system, we have folks who are not going to be able to work, who are not going to be able to pay rent, who are not going to be able to put food on the table. You know, these things go hand in hand. And, you know, Sunrise, like here in Kansas City, we know that our bus system is vital for a lot of people, but it's seen as, you know, the second option. It's seen as like, why wouldn't you get a car? You know, why wouldn't you go ahead and just drive to work every day instead of taking a bus? And it's not, and one, like, yeah, it is an option of like people can't afford it, but also why should they have to? Why should there not be an option to have a public transit system that is just, that is green and powered by union jobs? You know, so one, the way I see it is just really lifting that up and reframing what a public transit system looks like in Kansas City.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aiden. Davita, can you go next?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think just to iterate things that have been said before, I think fundamentally what matters to us is like really like building worker power, right? And thinking about, you know, not just, you know, the climate uncertainty we're talking about, but also economic uncertainty that folks are living in and the political uncertainty we're all entering in, of just like when we think about a future that is uncertain and a future that has always been uncertain, right? There are like opportunities there, right? Like a future that is just certain means there's no possibilities to build anything new. And I think part of what we're trying to do is really like be really rooted in place and really like rooted here in the land, right? And I think what's one of the opportunities we have of being here in Sonoma County, of like being able to do organizing that's very much connected to the also the needs of like the actual land and like what is need in terms of its own regeneration and healing. And you know, it was a really thinking about 2 years ago when we, which I think was like the first time we had some of our worker leaders do a kind of like a pile burn, you know, prescribed burn out at one of our our partners, Mona and Zrill, like it was a really powerful moment for me, right? Like I was there with Maria Salinas, who is like a leader in the Chitino community here, you know, originally from Oaxaca. And like I've heard her speak before of like like her remembering, you know, doing burns like this with her dad back in Oaxaca on like their, you know, ancestral little plot of land, and like what it meant, and hearing her talk about it, and being there on this like scarred hillside from just like that had been completely, you know, obliterated in a previous fire, and be on top of this hill under these, you know, still standing tan oaks, and watching these like worker leaders put this fire down and reconnecting to their own power and their own knowledge and leadership. You know, you know, it really brought me, you know, to tears to see the power in that, right? And I think part of that, the real kind of like deep sacredness in that has allowed us to really also like re-energize the part of the movement we are the center of here in Sonoma County. Not saying there isn't a vibrant other movement of like tenant leaders and immigrant mothers fighting for languages in schools, but like being able to have this as a really as a base and a pillar of just the broader movement here in Sonoma County as we're fighting, you know, for more just use has been really energizing and really powerful. So and again, it's just to be able to like center especially in this moment, right? To be able to like center immigrant and indigenous worker leaders in their power, and not like, you know, falling into this narrative of like, oh, the pobrecito like farm workers. No, it's like folks are really powerful, especially when they're backed up to flex their power and win, you know, and inspire others to win. And then they like to build the structures to take on all the crises that are coming, like that comes from building, you know, grassroots power. And so it's really cool to be able to be doing that from the ground up here.
Awesome. Thank you, Davida. And Ben?
Yeah, there's something in the title that really reflecting on the from below portion. I think is really good to think on, because when we talk about climate change and all the impacts, who is on the front lines of you know, bearing the brunt of that? It's, you know, working class people all over the world, right? It's the poor, it's the people who are doing the hardest jobs. And when we think about it more locally in our communities, it's the people, it's the working class. But their buy-in and their fight and their efforts to make a change in how everything in this world runs is also what's going to make sure it happens, right? Um, it's not, you know, the changes that need to be done are huge and systemic, and we need all hands on deck. And having the working class bought into that is what actually is going to make sure it gets done. And I think that that's why organizing around labor and climate things together is something that's so inspiring, because we're talking to people about a positive vision, right? Um, Austin's a town where apparently all these billionaires have decided to move here and make it real expensive, and someone told them that this was a place where we didn't care about our neighbors and we didn't stick up for each other, when the Austin that I know is about, you know, hey, be cool, man. Like don't be rude to my neighbor. That's not nice, you know? Um, and they're selling a vision of austerity. They're the ones pushing the vision of, oh, there's going to be some temporary pain. Well, not for me, I'm a billionaire, but for y'all, it's going to be some pain. And what we're trying to get people on board is, I want you to have a good life. I want you to have a great life. I want you to be able to have good, meaningful work that's going to pay you a good salary, good living life where you can afford a place to live, not have to hold down 2 or 3 jobs. And I want there to be good public infrastructure for you to enjoy with your family after work, you know? I want there to be a beautiful, clean spring where you can go take a dip when it's hot. You know, good transit for you to get down there. Thank you, Aiden. Like I'm loving the work. You know, as somebody who rides the bus, you know, we able to scale down to sharing one small hybrid car, and you know, with between telework and bikes and the bus, we make it work. And you know what? Through my union, I get a good union discount when I do need to rent a car to drive out of town. You know, it's a good life, and that's what we got to tell people that talking about climate is not something that's going to be austere and a scary and like make you have less. I want you to have a better thing. And we're trying to upgrade your situation. And you know, as we talk about that and get people on board, we're building community, which again, that from below, that's what's going to get us through the tough times, right? We've seen it throughout history. It's through solidarity. We're not leaving anybody behind. We're not pushing anybody under the bus. It's united front. It's building strong institutions, whether that's talking to your coworkers, talking to your neighbors, and it can take many forms. It's the union. It's whatever your political home is in your town or city. It's for some people, it's your soccer supporters group. For me, it's your D&D group. For those of y'all who have those, it's your book club, or ladies who lunch together. It's your brunch group. Honestly, talking to your neighbors and you're building your community and getting input and buy-in and saying, hey, can you come down to City Hall with me? They're deciding whether we're going to have a gas plant or if we're going to invest that money in good solar and storage, and interconnecting us with places that have renewables that they're going to sell us. Can you make a phone call? Can you blast out an email? And then, hey, they took that little step because they know you and they trust you, and they realized, oh, it's not that difficult. And then you've got somebody else who's going to be standing with you shoulder to shoulder for the other fight when they're attacking a vulnerable population, whoever it may be. They're there with you. And you know what? They're going to stick up for you when they're coming to attack you because you're a trade unionist or whatever. And it's such a beautiful vision for a positive way forward that's not dependent on the billionaires. It's dependent on my neighbors and my coworkers and my friends in the union.
Great. Thank you, Ben. And thanks to all of you for putting your questions in the chat. We'll get through some of them, I think, but I wanted to bring Jeremy back up. Jeremy, just your reflections on what our panelists have expressed, based on what you've tried to share in your book. And then just one of the questions too, to help sort of frame that, someone had asked how the Democrats have failed catastrophically to reach non-union working class voters, and what are the best practices for the labor movement to organize workers and communities outside the NLRA framework. And so, possibly you can reflect on that question, through what we've just heard from our panelists as well.
I'll do my best.
Thanks.
What was said here is so much an embodiment of what I was trying to bring out in the Green New Deal from Below book, that in a certain way, I don't feel the need to do more than underline a couple of things that people have been saying. And the one of the principal things about the Green New Deal, when it emerged, what made it different from the previous very important and serious efforts to have climate protection, to have legislation for climate transition. But what the Green New Deal brought was the idea of integrating that and with the needs of workers and communities, and treating them not as different things that, well, perhaps could be brought together, but were not inherently connected, and instead seeing the needs of working people for jobs, the needs of discriminated and oppressed communities for justice, was something that could be made integral to the climate struggle. And all of the things we've heard here, I think, reflect in one way or another that fundamental core principle of the Green New Deal of the Green New Deal. And then the examples that have been given here so beautifully represent making that Green New Deal from below. The question of politics and the failures of the Democratic Party, which are so evident in what we've just faced in the elections, and so evident more broadly even before that in the extent to which even the best programs like the Inflation Recovery Act were primarily skewed towards purposes like carbon capture, trying to pick a war with China, and other things that are not really going to be that helpful for ordinary folks, even though good things also came out of it. So the difficulties with the Democratic Party are only made more evident by the election that we just went through. And the core of the problem is pointed out in one of the people who wrote in the chat, which is that for the most part, the Democratic Party is controlled and owned by the oligarchy. It's owned by the wealthy. It's owned by the people who are the big bucks contributors. And there obviously are exceptions, and that's very important. And it's important that we work with that and make use of it. But the core power relationships do need to be acknowledged and taken seriously. And that's why, there's been vast criticism of the Democratic Party for not speaking to the needs of ordinary working people. And that's why they lost the election. But a lot of that commentary does not go to the next step, which is, well, why didn't they and why don't they? And the reason is because they're controlled by a different set of interests. My approach to this starts with the fact that the Green New Deal from below has in fact been building political bases around the country. They may be inside the Democratic Party, they may be independent, they may be in some cases third party based. They are political in that sense on the inside, allied with all kinds of organizing and action in civil society that is not contained within the electoral system, but is also able to affect it both from inside and from outside. And I think that's the strength of what the Green New Deal from below has been doing. It's also true that the Green New Deal as a national phenomenon was actually created as a coalescence of initially the Sunrise Youth Movement, and then its allies on, so to speak, the outside, and AOC and important politicians who came to support the Green New Deal. And those forces inside and outside working very, very cooperatively together. So both at the national level and in the local and state level, I think that cooperation of inside and outside is going to be a crucial part of, first of all, building the Green New Deal from below, and then expanding it to be the basis for a new national approach.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeremy. We had a specific question for Aiden about if the Better Buses for Kansas City is a bi-state effort. And I think Aiden, you had said it's Missouri based, right?
Yeah, it's Missouri based right now. Kansas City, Missouri. For those who don't know, there's like a weird there's a Kansas City, Missouri and a Kansas City, Kansas, which is confused often. But we're based in Missouri, though our public transit system does go into Kansas. So it will impact Kansas routes and hopefully for the better. But we're just based in Missouri.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thanks for the great conversation in the chat. We've recorded this, so we're going to pull it together and we can post this very soon. Please sign up to stay in touch with the Labor Network for Sustainability. And Jeremy, thank you. Thank you for the end product, this book. We'll put in the chat once more the discount to purchase the book. Thank you for our panelists for your time and sharing all of your stories. And we hope to be in communication with all of you moving forward. So thanks everyone for joining us. Onwards.